Tau Sigma Delta was started at the University of Michigan by two faculty who thought that architecture students should be recognized for their achievements academically. So it is an academic honor. We will probably have 30 to 40 new members this year. You have to have completed at least the first half of the third year, have no less than a 3-point GPA, and be in the upper 20% of the students enrolled. I have served on the national board for the last 20 years. I was past president, and it has been an honor to see all the students from Texas Tech apply and become members of Tau Sigma Delta.
I first met Brian MacKay Lyons only briefly at the University of Texas and a number of years ago, and I think at your Hill House was getting a lot of publication, I think, at that time. Is that right? Maybe close to that. Anyway, I was knocked out by a couple of things. One is I was knocked out by the elegance of his work, and I was also knocked out by the way in which his work seemed to express its relationship to the site in a poetic way. Seemed to be able to accomplish a kind of a poetic relationship with the site. Now, there was a time then for a number of years, and I actually spent a year in Canada. They deported me. When I first came to Texas Tech that first year, Brian was one of the lecturers at that point, and reminded me of the kinds of character about architecture that I had admired in the first time that I saw his work. And the other thing that I really appreciated is that he saw a kind of a beauty in our landscape, which I saw too, and so I appreciated that sensitivity. We had an opportunity. Darwin Harrison, a graduate of Texas Tech, and really quite a bright guy and an excellent photographer. You see his work at the Union. Had an idea. He had some money left over from an Architour. I thought maybe he was running guns to El Salvador, but actually it turned out that it was just money left over from good management. And he came and he was thinking about what could we do that would be interesting. And he actually is the one who came up with the idea. Let's send a student to Ghost. So we called up and we asked if they would save a spot for us, and Brian said yes, and so we sent our first student to Ghost, and we've sent a student to Ghost every year since then. And it's always been a great experience where they come back and they talk about it. Travis Chappelle talked about it just a couple of weeks ago. As you may remember, Ghost was, well, I'll let Brian explain what Ghost is. Unless you want me to just tell the whole story. Unfortunately, I don't. But here's the thing that I think is really important. It's a commitment. Brian would use the word will, and I'm going to let him use it in a poetic way, but it is the kind of commitment, professional commitment, but it's also an aesthetic commitment. And to understand that the poetry in architecture speaks in a way that music speaks, that painting speaks, that sculpture speaks. And those are our high ambitions. Those are our aspirations, both daily aspirations and also career aspirations. Listening to Brian talk about his work again at the Midland Symposium that we just came from, the Hinterland Symposium put on by the Texas Society of Architects. It reminded me of those aspirations and how there is in Texas a line of sympathetic designers who are reaching those kinds of aspirations through their architecture and their art. And it's, and I was really delighted that we were able to then get Brian to come up here. And it's difficult. He's here because he feels a connection with all of you and a connection with this college, because he's just gotten back from New Zealand and then flew from Nova Scotia to Texas. It got into Midland late Friday night at 11 o'clock. So it's, I'm really grateful that Brian is here, because it's a commitment that he's made. So I would, as you listen to Brian talk today, I hope you will think about commitment and the way in which you too can make a similar kind of commitment. And speaking of commitments, I'd like to mention two people. One person who has helped us with Ghost, in the sense that he was able to get me to Ghost 13, which is was a seminal experience in my life, in my career. Gary Wilson, our faculty member from Houston. So thanks, Gary, I appreciate it. And Marie Hall, a person you don't know, but someone who has helped us build culture in our college. Marie is a wonderful woman who believes in architecture. She's given us the Dean Pierce chair, which allows us to have our atelier topical studios. And it also has helped us, in this case, bring Brian here. So and that kind of commitment from Gary and Marie is the kind of commitment that I hope you all will also think about as you think about the things that Brian's going to introduce to you. So,
the talk is called Listening and Willing. I think I'll start by reading a couple of things to you. So architectural design is a combination of listening and willing. It begins with listening, which is based on empathy. My teacher, the American architect Charles Moore, talked about listening to place, landscape, and the users through participatory design. The Sea Ranch condominiums that they did in California in the 60s liberated a whole generation of young architects to look to humble vernacular models for design inspiration. British art historian John Berger, in his influential book Ways of Seeing, which is read by most art students, talks about learning the discipline of seeing or interpreting the world. My friend Glenn Murcutt listens to climate. His exquisite houses are didactic environmental instruments, heightening awareness of the sun, the wind, and water. Team 10 architect Aldo Van Eyck studied the architecture of the Dogon in Africa in the 1950s, listening for the anthropological beginnings of architecture. Another Team 10 architect, Giancarlo De Carlo, who I used to work for in Italy, talked about reading place or context. Before Giancarlo died, he said to me, he was the founder of the innovator on participatory design. He's the person in the world who started participatory design practice. And Charles Moore learned it from him, and so on. And I learned it from Charles. But before Giancarlo died, he said, to serve is not to be a servant. In other words, listening is not enough. Architecture is also the art of what you can cause to happen in spite of the odds. It's not a passive thing. Alvarado said, on Willing, all of architecture is a search for paradise on earth. So I believe that architecture has a utopian dimension that often involves resistance to the dominant cultural forces or zeitgeist. So the making of architecture is also an act of will. So you're going to see this listening and willing through the work that I'm going to show you tonight. Kenneth Frampton built on the work of Lewis Mumford and Hartwell Hamilton Harris in order to articulate a critical regionalist argument. His essay, Towards Critical Regionalism, 6 Points for an Architecture of Resistance introduces the necessity for both listening, regionalism, and willing, the critical part. For me, this is a pragmatic design method which involves mining context and local material cultures as sources of authenticity and content, without copying the past. Of course, the writers are better at saying these things than the architects, so I'll read a quote by Mexican poet Octavio Paz, who talks about the need for listening to the past while willing the project of modernity. He says, alone tradition stagnates and modernity vaporizes. Together, modernity breathes life into tradition, and tradition responds by providing depth and gravity. Should leave the writing to the writers. So, if we're listening to things, what are we going to listen to? Are we going to listen to the folk version or the lowbrow version of Crossroads by Robert Johnson? Or are we going to listen to, oh, that'd be great if you could bring the lights down. Perfect. So do we listen to Robert Johnson play Crossroads, or do we listen to Eric Clapton play Crossroads? Do we listen to the folk version or the Baroque version? The highbrow or the lowbrow? So for us, it's not an either-or thing, because we're, as practitioners, I mean, I'm an academic, I usually don't like to admit, but as a practitioner, you really just use whatever you can get your mitts on for content. So we go down the back alleys and we go to the mountain. So it's not a new idea that serious artists have looked to the folk for inspiration. We know that Picasso looked at African masks. We know that Louis Kahn probably looked at this kind of stuff. We know that Tchaikovsky listened to Russian folk dances. We know that Elvis went to the juke joints in the Mississippi Delta. It goes on and on. We know that the great cuisines of the world are coming out of poverty, right? Why else would the French eat chocolate-coated ants and frog's legs? And where it started. So I guess I believe, in a way, that all culture derives from the poor. I came to this, I guess, partly because when I got to architecture school, my professor said that I was a hick and that I had no business being an architect. I didn't dress right and talk right. So I said, okay, I'm either going to be a first-rate hick or a third-rate version of what they wanted me to be. So I started taking these kind of pictures into school to piss my professors off, who were mostly, failed European architects, who really hadn't done anything. British guys. Anyway, so I began taking pictures of this stuff and studying it out of anger, and then, of course, anger doesn't take you all the way. And so I began to learn from this about culture, about a democratic view of culture that doesn't just involve the highbrow. So here we see the cultural principle of the mother-in-law door here. We call this at home. So I guess the highbrow, lowbrow thing is like Gordon Clark here with his chainsaw cutting up ordinary buildings. Now this idea of looking to the ordinary, the everyday, is really something I think particular to a kind of New World philosophy. A kind of democratic ethos that we have in North America, they have it in Australia, New Zealand, where I just was. It's kind of Anglo-American tradition. Because our ancestors all came to the New World because they wanted to break out of a kind of class system. So if you talk like this in South America, no one knows what you're talking about. Anyway, so I lived abroad for a number of years, decided to go back home and study the place where my family had been for 400 years, marrying their first cousins. And being very deliberate about studying the place. And like a kid who goes in the woods to play with a bag of jelly beans, you kind of leave a trail of jelly beans so you can find your way home, so you know where you've been and how to get back home. Which is a slow process. So I started drawing all the barns in the village, drawing the spaces between them. And I like to say that my whole career has kind of come out of this barnyard, which is our barnyard today as well. Everything I know about architecture, I feel, came from there. So this is one of the buildings in the barnyard. So I've always been interested in understanding these buildings pragmatically, like a farmer. You know, where does the cow should go? And also understanding them as a modern architect. So thinking about white square on red field, red square on white field, like in the supremacist painting. So it's a kind of both and philosophy. Hedging your bets. We're also inspired by this. You know, this is a Shaker architecture, Shaker furniture, which also inspired Louis Kahn. He was deeply affected by Shaker design. The Shakers were trying to be as modern and progressive as they could be when they did that. And of course, Kahn copied all of their joinery details. Interested in architecture without architects. Bernard Rudofsky's book called Architecture Without Architects was an important book because it said, you know, what regular folks do is more interesting than what architects do most of the time, and I agree with that. The drive up here from Midland today was more interesting than reading architecture magazines, I know that. So this is the kind of architecture of Canada in a way, the kind of 20-acre cordwood pile in Quebec, where we're doing some work right now. Hand split, 20 acres of hand split, birch by one guy. A bit obsessive guy. This is the climate where we work. It favors kind of taut-skin buildings, buildings that are like shrink-wrapped. If you want the building to leak, you put an overhang, and you get an ice dam on your cold eaves, and your building will leak. If you cut that off, it won't. So it favors this kind of monolithic architecture. When I got to architecture school, you know, the modern movement was a Mediterranean-inspired thing. You know, all about interpenetrating forms. Well, in Canada, interpenetrating forms means thermal bridges and leaks and all kinds of rot building. So we have the highest weathering rate in North America. We have 250 freeze-thaw cycles a year in Nova Scotia. So it forces us to think about building skins as kind of weather instruments. This is the barnyard again. This is our chicken house, where Travis knows this building. And it's where my daughter lives now, 12 feet wide. So you can see the advent calendar approach with the shutters making the skin a machine. Favors the taut skin, so this is a 200-foot long barn with not a quarter of an inch of relief. So this is very different than what I learned about in school that modern architecture was about. So I had to find a way of making modern architecture for a northern climate and out of a wood material culture tradition, a light timber frame. Not even big, muscular, heavy timbers like the Pacific Northwest, but just little sticks. I've been trying, I've been on this Wood Design Awards jury, you know, North American Wood Design Awards jury 3 times now. I keep trying to argue with the jurors that this is a really fine tradition. This is a sustainable tradition. This is an elegant tradition. You know, but the architects seem to like structural expression and muscular buildings. And this is much more elegant, I think. So this year our firm won 3 North American Wood Design Awards. And one sort of weird one, like a Lifetime Achievement Award, which means you're getting old. So finally, so the back alleys are always more interesting. The vernacular is great inspiration. Most of these buildings are within walking distance of our farm. Vernacular is always up to date here with the TV dish. Never sentimental. So we think of vernacular like a, you know, a calendar, you know, like calendar images, you know, romantic, picturesque, sentimental. And I would say there's nothing sentimental about what non-architects do. It's the ugly 80% of the world. It's what you do when you can't afford to get it wrong. That's why it's good. I grew up playing underneath the ships under construction. 150 years ago, half of the ships in the world were built in Nova Scotia. So everything is biased toward wood material culture. So everybody's a shipbuilder. My grandfather was a sea captain and a schooner. So I would play as a kid in the shavings underneath these things. And I guess the belly, you're going to see a project a little later with a good belly, like a boat has a belly when it's up on cradles like that. So the fifth elevation is the belly. I was lucky though, my parents took me out of the village, but as a kid, so I got this external perspective on it. So I'd be, you know, in the Sistine Chapel one day and playing under the boats the next. So I was fortunate. Anyway, in this culture, buildings are light, they're movable, they're like the boats. You just move them around, float them, raft them, drag them with oxen. The weather pushes them around, they get all twisted like this. So I guess I started getting more and more interested in weathering in climate in architecture as I got a little older, more experienced. So in Nova Scotia, we think of the buildings as lightweight, that they're going to blow away, that they're not really grounded, that they're primary forms that really are in spite of nature in a way which is a gentle way of talking to nature. Merkett talks about light touching the land lightly, rather than pretending to look like nature. Act like nature, don't look like nature. So these buildings are very unnatural looking. And the ocean horizon is everywhere. We have 5,000 miles of coastline in Nova Scotia, so the ocean horizon is always the level, the thing that you understand your relationship to the world in terms of. Three little pigs are showing us how to make microclimates, which is important in a cold climate. Drawing from 30 years ago in my village, trying to understand these microclimates. This is a tiny little farm that's 80 feet wide, and it has 13 buildings. Years later, we actually made a project on that little farm, which I'm not going to show you. So this is from my teachers. Up yours to my teachers, he said, there's no connection between the folk and the higher and the low art. This is, especially Europeans, the German, British German architecture historians said there's no connection between the basilica and the bicycle shed. The bicycle shed is mere building, the basilica is architecture. So, up yours, Mr. Hess. So this is a little vinyl-sided church in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and there's a 200-foot tall wooden building made out of 2x6s next to where I grew up in Pointe-de-l'Église, Nova Scotia. Tallest wooden building in North America, built like a folk art mailbox. Just got a little too big. Held up by Our Lady of Canadian Tire. I worked for Charles Ward, interested in his humanist perspective. Go to the mountain, Mosque of Cordoba, takes you back to Texas. I think Kahn knew a lot about this building when he made this building. Great thing about this building is it could be the 1,400-year-old building that this is. This is as fresh now as it was 1,400 years ago. This could have been built by the Romans back then. I guess another thing, like highbrow, lowbrow, that I wanted to get out of the way as a non-issue is this local-global question. There's kind of an idea that if you're interested in place, like climate, landscape, material culture, that you're being provincial, that you're only thinking about where you live. And I would say there's no way to get to universal principles in art, architecture, or anything else other than by looking to the particular. So I don't think there's any choice. I mean, Monet made the water lilies paintings in his backyard as he was becoming in his old age. So he had to go to his backyard to get to a universal position about art. When Da Vinci painted The Last Supper, he painted out the window. Take a look at it. It's Vinci. It's the farm he grew up on, outside the window of one of the most universal paintings ever made there. So I think that's a kind of also a non-issue, like modernity and tradition, or highbrow. So here's the projects. I'm going to take you through a very cheap little projects that you do when you're starting your practice and you got nothing, you got no rich aunties, you got no to hire you, you're not well connected, so you just start making some stuff. So I started very young. When I was 23 years old making projects. A historian said to me, when you're coming from an intact material culture tradition, you don't need an a priori theory to begin working. The thesis, in a way, is in the culture that wraps around you, like ambient influence. So we just started building and trying to build a theory from project to project to project, like pushing a rope. So this is a $30,000 building, all about not building in the field. There's a monument in a ditch in Nova Scotia to Canada's Grandma Moses, whose house I played in as a child. Folk artist, octave galvanized. It's the village where they have the world's largest scallop fleet. So they have these captive galvanized drags they pull in the bottom of the ocean, and they pick up scallops. So when we opened this, I told the local fishermen that was why it had to be silver. And so they beat up anybody who tries to paint it. So we started trying to use this in a naive way, perhaps, this kind of shipbuilding thinking, in a quite a literal way early on. This is a $50,000 house we did. Lean-to, protected back for someone who had been sexually abused as a child. Built it in 2 weeks, no power tools, lots of drugs and alcohol. Guys right out of jail. Middle of the winter, December, sleeping in the snowbank, this is crazy. The rumpy side that faces the woods, the kind of Hansel and Gretel woods, that's spooky. So learning from the vernacular. This is not about making things that look pretty. It's about making things that are tough. Another project, $85,000 on the North Coast. This is all about weathering, using a project to study the weathering on these other buildings around. Of course, when I told the local farmer that this building was inspired by his barns, he thought I was nuts. But this is a armored building facing north. It's the way I learned to draw from the folk artist, so you can see why they want to kick me out of architecture school. First the university wanted to kick me out of architecture school, then the profession tried to kick me out of the profession. So I've had a good run at anger. So even though we do buildings now that are farther from the barnyard, farther from the village, we still do the little 1,000 square foot building every year to try to bring us back to the kind of origins of things, to zero. Yeah, it is zero. So this is a 1,000 square foot house a couple of years ago. We always do the party together with the clients, because I learned that from Charles Moore. He said the only truth he found was that participation always works. So we get this kind of pre-approved scheme after 2 beers in the tavern, and we do it with the owner. It starts as a kind of analysis drawing and turns into a proposition. So that goes directly to that. The 12-foot tin can. It's like a ship because it's so small. We make all furniture. And this is one from Charles Moore, the kind of hedonist. And you get to lay in bed there on the plinth, in this 24-foot high room on this cherry plinth with the pillow of light there, and look at your spouse having a shower through the fire. I think this was a client, I think, who didn't have enough fun in college or something. So every year we go back and we look at this stuff. So this building's gone, obviously. This is a building in our village, and now it's gone. The one behind it's also gone. So, but then 20 years after that went, we made this project, just last year, which was just on the cover of Azure. All about minimum, all about the kind of minimum project. So this is a $200,000 house. It looks like it's on the ground, and then you realize it's not. So it's all about landscape, about heightening one's sense of dwelling in the landscape, like Heidegger talks about dwelling in the landscape, you know, understanding where you are in the world through architecture, or making the landscape more legible by the architecture. Again, the fifth elevation. They only had 450 acres, so we didn't have enough land. We had to put it in the air. So it's a kind of camera. All these buildings are cameras. They're like helmets that you wear to understand the landscape. So the steel, then the wood. Some more cheap projects. This is another landscape typology, which is a kind of lean-to in the landscape, facing Cape North, which is the end of the Appalachian mountain chain that starts in Georgia and ends here. So when we do these projects, we think about landscape like that. We think about 2,000 miles of landscape when we make a project. This is a house for a weatherman, all about, it's a pay-as-you-go project. We don't do mortgages. In rural Nova Scotia, you don't spend money you don't have. My dad said to me as a kid, he said, "You see that guy with the Maserati there? He doesn't own that. The bank owns that." So people in Nova Scotia live in tar-papered over basements until they can afford the lumber, and they live in a house without windows until they can afford the windows, and they take a chainsaw and they cut the window holes out. So this house is like that. It's a ground viewing platform. It's a landscape viewing instrument again. There's Cape North. The North Star is directly above that. That's the end of the Appalachian Mountains there. And it was built in 2 weeks. It was prefabricated and erected in the site in 2 weeks for $100,000 US. Because the local warrior society would have given them a hard time if they built it on site. So we built it in a warehouse in the city and took it up there. It's an elemental project. The last one was very monolithic. So that's a kind of early call when we're doing projects. Not a bad site. People think the landscape is like really beautiful in Nova Scotia. Really, it's trick photography, right? Like every place is ugly. Every place has got bad stuff. And it's an act of will, thinking about willing to want to see it as something beautiful, and to cultivate that beauty by the way you add something and the way you edit up the rest in a way. So there's lots of ugly stuff in Cape Breton. When we do a cheap one, we usually do a kind of spiffier one. So I've been working as an architect for about 34 years, and we work somebody said to me when I was very young, you should look at the way Franklin Wright practiced. He did 450 prairie houses. There are really only 3 plans, right? All the prairie houses are really based on 3 plan types. So that seemed like a good idea for 2 reasons. One is if you add a 20% or a 10% research factor to each project, the 90% means you can make a living. You can actually be efficient. You can put bread on the table. You guys have to believe that you can make a living as architects. Otherwise, we shouldn't be standing up here. So if I couldn't make a living as an architect, I wouldn't teach, because it would be child abuse. It would be lying. So this idea of variation on a theme, not a bad idea. You know, Bach did it, Franklin Wright did it, Monet did it, all the serious people do it. If you don't work like that, you're doomed to be an amateur your whole life. In school, we're often taught, I was taught, that to be creative, you have to subscribe to this creativity myth of the noble savage. You take your clothes off, you go in the woods, you sit on a rock, and you wait for a lightning bolt, and then you draw something no one's ever seen before. And that's just bullshit. That has nothing to do with creativity at all. If you work like that, you'll always be an amateur, because you'll keep trying to make something different all the time. And that means you're starting over all the time. You know, Glenn Murcutt doesn't work like that. He said to me, you know, all my buildings are 80% designed by the culture. And I do semi-tailored garments. I do the 20%. That's a Franklin record. So we work like that too. So we can get better, you know, so that it's a lifetime, perpetual learning thing to be an architect. So you can do your best work like Franklin, right? Well, Guggenheim was pretty good, some flaky stuff in his 90s, but you know, Lucan for sure. You know, so many of the best artists. You know, Matisse made his best paintings when he was blind and in his 90s, 80s, late 80s. You know that Picasso did amazing stuff in his 90s. Hopefully that's the way it gets to work for you. First sketch of the site for clients, try to understand the place. And we don't like live on the site, camp on the site, and all that. Like that's kind of a myth too, I think. You know, we go there for an hour with the client, and I've trained myself to say, okay, by the end of the day, don't go to the site if you don't plan to build something, because we're going to spend an hour on the site, 2 hours in the tavern, then you're going to get all excited, you're going to want to build it. And so this is that drawing that you do with the client. There's the two clients, and me. Climbing up, you see, looking out to the ocean horizon, having our view capped by the sheet of steel, protected at the back against the woods, all of that stuff. So I've trained myself, I think, to do this. It's a kind of a thing you have to learn to do, and be disciplined with yourself about it. Get the essence in that first day. It takes a long time to learn that. So it's a great field to be into because it's a lifetime thing. It's not like being a fashion model, where one fashion model told me one time, I'm 21, it's over when you're 21. Or the mathematician, you know. So that's what happens, you know, a year later. So that's that diagram of dwelling on that rock, climbing up into this room, into this pavilion, which has a 270-degree ocean horizon, and having the ocean revealed to you in a kind of sequence. The historian said, when you stand at the island, it's 24 long kitchen island, in this house, you feel like the ocean horizon is going to cut you in half at the waist, because the building is designed to heighten your sense of that. And it doesn't matter what landscape you're in, you can do that. If I was on a desert island, I would do that. It would be different. It would be different than in Nova Scotia. So this kind of way of working is not a style, it's a discipline. It's a toolkit. I think that being a kind of regionally sensitive to place is really just about being responsible, having good manners. If you're going to be an architect, you have to pay attention. And if you don't, you're being irresponsible. So it's no more than that. And because it's a toolbox, you can take it anywhere. So you'll see a little later we leave the village and we go off to Bangladesh and other places, and you'll see that the toolbox goes with you. So it's culturally transferable, largely. So here you live between the rock and the blade of steel, like in the sketch. Some more stuff. Early projects. Again, trying to make the high-brow, low-brow connection, the kind of farm versus the kind of Kimball Art Museum. This is poor man's Kimball, kind of Kimball in a minority art. Sliding by one another. So this is a theme. Actually, there's a book being written on our work now by a historian who's trying to make the connection between the houses we do and the public buildings we do. So this obviously generates houses. Again, the circles between are the important thing. The building is not the thing. The black bits are the buildings. The white bits are the spaces that are made. We're painfully aware of this because of our climate being so lousy. I showed this to a bunch of people, lay people there one night in Halifax, and they all started laughing. They were in the publishing industry, and they thought my child had done this. So I went with it. Oh yeah, that's my 4-year-old made that. So is this a proposition or a study about landscape? You know, is it analysis or a proposition? It's obviously a conversation because you don't draw like that if you're drawing for yourself. So here's the project, put tin cans lying around. Turn between. So we work with these traditional forms quite a bit of the time. And I'm not sure actually that the buildings you get from this aren't better. Certainly the landscape they make is better. You know, we do lots and lots and lots of buildings in the village architect mode on the back of, you know, pieces of grid paper for clients. And it's kind of like being the country doctor, you know, people come and you say, take 2 aspirin and go to bed. You know, do a sketch of a gable building, fits into the landscape nice, don't build in the middle of the field, stay at the field. And I think those buildings actually make a better world than the kind of hit records that architects try to make. The kind of, every project doesn't need, if you're the country doctor, brain surgery. Sometimes it's just a common cold, and you just need a simple answer. So we always are troubled by this. So we go back and forth, we're confused. We go back to the kind of barnyard and we do this stuff. And people actually like it. They're not so sure about our more overt modernism. So we look at the historic, you know, at the elders in the community. I think these buildings have long relationships with these buildings like the elders around our farm. And you just, old people, you just gotta talk to them a lot when they're alive so that you can learn something that you can apply later. So this is a beautiful barn that was going down. You can see it's going down. It has all the stuff my professors didn't want, you know, me to show them, like the 3-foot-high walls and the pinwheeling connections and the ugly colors together, like on the Mexican flag. And plasticity, ironic plasticity that comes in light timber frame. This was a little too plastic, it fell down. And 15 years later, we made that one, across the road from it, in memory of it. This time it was 12-foot overhangs, 3-inch eaves. This is one, we get along great with our clients, but these people we didn't like very much. So we now call this the barn house instead of the house by their name, by their family name. Guy got drunk one time and he said, you know, I never pay the last 10% of any bill. I said, okay. Well, I said, bad idea, you know, your furnace is going to break down in the middle of the winter sometime and nobody's going to come. You know, you're going to have a hard time keeping air in your tires. Because, you know, in Nova Scotia, we're really good at passive aggression. I think something like you guys, I suspect you guys are very similar. So these guys really, what bugged me about them was they abused the builders every day. They said in Toronto, you know, in the big smoke, you know, we don't do it like this, and these are fantastic carpenters. And you know that carpenters told me, and they said, you know, and I saw it, I witnessed it. They said, you know, we don't mind though, because we're building a cathedral together. Architecture is a lot about what you can cause to happen, right, with other people. You know the story about the bricklayers, right? The 3 bricklayers. Do you know the story? The person goes to a site and there's a plank and 3 bricklayers are on the plank. Ask the first bricklayer, what are you doing? And he said, I'm making a living. Okay, that's important. Ask the next person, what are you doing? He said, I'm making a wall. And ask the third person, what are you doing? He says, I'm building a cathedral. So which of those bricklayers are you going to be, you know? You need to be all 3, right? Because you don't make a living, you can't be doing cathedrals. You know, you need to do it all. So anyway, these guys really believed they were making a cathedral. So the fact that the client was abusive to them really didn't matter. And yeah, and their furnace breaks down and no one fixes it. This is great. So this is a pavilion that is between south, which is very important for us, and the ocean. Built by shipbuilders, like a boat upside down. If you look at the hull of a boat, you see that the keel, the landing keel of a boat, and the ribs of the boat locking into the keel, and the masts locking into the keel, and the ribs is how the boat gets its primary structure. It's a big boat. If it's a little boat, it's made like a basket. That's something different. So you can see we still do these gable buildings, these simple gable buildings, and try to see how zero we can get with them. How, you know, I was told by an old architect when I was very young that the measure of an architect is how a wall meets a roof or how a building meets the sky, right? So you just saw a 12-foot overhang that's 3 inches thick. That's why women pluck their eyebrow, you know, it's important. And this is kind of zero again. You know, how zero can you get? We do that because we use outsolation and we don't need ventilation. So reinterpreting that stuff, super minimal, always making microclimates, the drawings that the computer doesn't like to make. If I can't make a drawing like this, I can't proceed. So a partie drawing is a kind of roadmap for purposeful action for an architect. So Andrew said I had to tell this story, so I'm going to, about sketching. Huffington posted an article recently and interviewed a bunch of us about drawing, sketching. And said, the guy said, you know, he's making a book on it now. I don't know who's publishing. Anyway, he asked everybody, you know, how many people in your office sketch, you know. So he asked Richard Meyer how many people in his office. He said 150. He said, how many sketch? 6. By hand. Well, 3D, live. So, and then they said, well, who does the design? Who's the author of the design work in your office? He said, 6 people. Same 6 people. So I'm absolutely certain if you can't draw upside down in 3D across the table in conversation with another person live, by hand, you will never be the author of anything. You'll never be going to drive the bus. You'll always be a passenger. You'll be a high-class draftsperson. Bill Mitchell, the guy who wrote all the books on computers and architecture, tried to get me on that bus 30 years ago. He said, Brian, you draw great. He said, any minute now you're going to be able to do that on the computer. Come with me. Well, I'm so happy I didn't go with him on that. Because 30 years ago, I mean, I'd be still waiting. You know, David Hockney's the first person to do any art that's any kind of serious on an iPhone now, right? 30 years is a long time. And the only reason anybody's buying those is because David Hockney can really paint. Anyway, so they're there. Real simple, elemental. We always do a kind of straight man out at the road, you know, the left-hand piece. We try to make it as minimal as possible because in Canada we have a social democratic culture, so we don't think you should put your gonads out on the front lawn. So you have to make an impersonal face. And Richard Sennett wrote this book called The Fall of Public Man about that idea of the need for impersonality in the public domain to have public life. So we still believe that. The thingness, you know, the stuffness in architecture, you gotta have a fireplace, gotta look nice, okay. But it's not really what it says that much. So you do it long enough, you get to know how to make a fireplace, but it's not really the point at all. Another house, very traditional craftsman style house. Again, floating, remember those fish shacks that were floating above the shoreline? Making microclimates. Making a public court and private court here in this case. Attenuating the eaves to express the idea of where the building is insulated and where it's not. Floating again. We're making an addition to this one. I tell my clients architect for life, so we come back and do additions. We made an addition to this one recently too. So more and more I get interested in making buildings that explain the landscape. Now this area around our village is where we have this drumlin landscape, which is glacial hills that are really sensual and round and left by the Ice Age. And so this building is 2 buildings on 2 hilltops that make a platonic form like those fish shacks floating above the land to call attention to that curvature of the land. And you live in the public space between the 2. So one on a river that drains a whole county, another one on the open ocean, across a wetland that's been cultivated. So you begin to get the idea that this is really an agricultural way of working. that these are landscape projects at the occasion of an architectural commission. Somebody asked me one time what you would like to do that you're not doing now, and I said from a lifestyle point of view, nothing. But from an art design point of view, I said I would like to make buildings that are more silent and that say more. So if I could make the building go away altogether, I would, just to have the landscape. So here's the two shit boxes, as they're called by the summer people who come here. The local guy who lives in the shit box down there, he gets it. So they're 500 feet apart, and they capture space between. So the lowbrow version of that story is the range lights, which are used on the coast to show the pilots where the deep water is coming into a harbor. The highbrow version is the great Ise Shrine in Japan, where the two islands are tied together with a rope. So the idea of building less and having more energy in the project is what this is about. You know, these are dinky little buildings, but they make a heroic, there's a kind of ironic monumentality because of the harnessing the energy of the landscape. Schematic design models. You're working in a material culture tradition. If you don't build in the stuff people know how to do, you just don't build anything. So we start figuring out where the strapping goes in schematic. This house is a kind of bouquet of structure that you sleep in, and there's public space between the hill and that. Dueling porches across the valley. It's all about expressing how the water gets off the roof, lands on a bench, goes out into the wetland. It's very weird to be in this house when you're drinking at night when there's fog, because people don't know, right? They're going over there for a drink, and have a few drinks, and then they start having this out-of-body experience because they're looking at the place where they think they're sitting, and then the fog goes in and then it disappears again. Very weird. Very weird. So this building is also about explaining the landscape, explaining those islands out there, and making them seem more swell than they are by compression under this box. Then we have to do a third box, very, very different. It's a spa. And this box is interlocking with the plan of the others. You arrive at it very, very differently. You arrive through the wetland that we made and through the moss and everything. And you arrive at this block of butter, which is all made out of cedar, same cedar. Everything is the same inside, color as the cedar. Glass tiles, the concrete floors. So that you really feel like you're in a kind of block of butter. And we tend to work like this a lot in kind of one material essays. A little building doesn't really want to be more complicated than that anyway. The climate forces us to do that. If you combine materials where we live, the weather gets in and it leaks. So you need one skin and then, in this case, one everything. We like to see how absolutely minimum we can be about these things, how pure we can be. And then some get a little carried away, some other ones. So this is a big lantern that then delaminates to make different kinds of indoor outdoor living. Family stuff. It's a bridge between two big rock outcrops. Unbuilt, so that's a good party. I like that party, and it'll come back because the client didn't build it. The intellectual property remains with the architect, right? So you'll do it some other time. So I want to do this twisted symmetry another time. House in the city, also very, very minimum. The big door slides across there, and there's nothing. That left door just closes over the right side. House for a person severely handicapped, can't show the big garage door that the excessive bus goes into. So this is a courtyard house. So what I tell my students when I teach first year design house projects, first question in town is, where's the street? If you're in the country, it's where's the sun? Second question in town is, where's the sun? Vis-a-vis that first choice and second choice, where are the public rooms? What Lucan would call the served spaces, the yellow bits. And where are the servant pieces, the pieces that serve those things, the black bits. So in a way, in an hour on the site with the client, we made this courtyard house in the city, and we know everything, in a way, about how to finish it, right down to the doorknobs. You know, you have privacy sets in the black stuff and passive set hardware in the yellow stuff. You know, you have concrete floors in the black stuff, and you have slate floors in the yellow stuff. You know, there's a kind of a implication for a method, and I think, you know, I know that young people don't usually like to be told that really it's a big accomplishment to develop a method, a way of working. But it keeps you in business. You know, if you have a method, a way of doing things, best practices. When you go to the brain surgeon, you want to hope that they have some best practices, right? That you're not the guinea pig. That they actually have ways of doing stuff. That's called professional skill, right? You hope. Here's the interior of that house. Is the family room with the 60-foot cabinet. The parlor in front of the street. Full parlor you enter through the wood box into. First time on the site, his client stood like this, and he said, he did this. There's the open ocean, there's south. Nova Scotia's on a big diagonal in the Atlantic Ocean. Everybody feels that, understands that, so the house gets to be literally that. First sketch, finished thing. Inexpensive, about $100 a square foot. Perfect shingles. Can't do shingles that good anywhere else. 16-year-old kid, $10 an hour, did the shingles. Because it's in a material culture tradition, people know how to do it. I didn't graduate thinking I would do this, you know, follow this stuff, but you kind of got to go with it, because otherwise you don't get to build anything. You don't want to be the misunderstood artist who blows their brains out because no one wants to buy the paintings. You know, you want to have a life, a career, a professional life. It means you've got to get into it, get into the material culture. Sometimes the site doesn't give you much, so you have to pull a boat out to the site. In this case, the interesting thing about the site for me was the view down the coastline at the material culture of the coastline, the farms that came into the water. And what was out there is what they paid the $1 million for the lot for, but it's just a flat line of ocean horizon. So we made this ship with the kind of lampshade house, midship, the kind of endoskeleton that makes a kitchen, a wicked kitchen actually, it looks up and down the toes, and then a library above, and that allows the envelope to hang like a lampshade. Again, we made all the furniture. So here's another landscape instrument. They had 8 acres, and we made a 12-foot wide house. People say, "Oh, you must have had, you know, a tight site." Yeah, it's only 8 acres. This house has to talk to 3 different coastlines. It has to talk to the village. Now you're in the house. Getting to a house is some of that free architecture, right? You don't have to build anything. So when you arrive in the village, you see through the porte cochere, you see the pivot rock there that we dug up, and you're in the house. By the time you actually get to the house, there's not much. It's a $200,000 house. So getting to the house is a big part of it. So east side looks to the cove. The south side, it's a passive solar house, like all the other ones. Faces the bay, the bigger bay. And the bigger bay is on the open ocean. And that's where the big westerly winds come in and rip your roof off. First sketch of the site with the client the first day on this wharf. This guy loved this sketching together thing, so he didn't want to build a house, and he told me, he admitted it. He said, "Look, I'm not going to build this house because we won't be able to have these interesting lunch dates." Because after 6 years of waiting for him to build this house, I said, "If you don't build this house right now, I'm never going to eat lunch with you again." So he built it, and you can see the ocean horizon. This drawing started with that line. And the building is hung. I think of our buildings as actually hung like clothes on a clothesline rather than sitting on the ground. And that's because of the cultural conditions we're in. That's just the way you grow up thinking buildings are. So it's hung from the ocean horizon. So that ocean horizon line became the top of concrete line. This house allowed me to think about why we have separate courses in school about structures and construction. Structure is a noun, construction is a verb. Construction is about how things are done, so it's the culture thing. So in this material culture, if you can figure out how to build a house by two guys in a half-ton truck with hand tools, then it's really cheap. So this house was $200,000. It was a record house, it was a AIA honor award house and all that kind of stuff. And I love seeing it published next to the kind of $10 million house for the architect's rich auntie. I love it. From a structural point of view, it's a bit of a mess, right? A little concrete, a little steel, a little wood. But construction-wise, it's extremely consistent. Top skin, zero-ness. There's a funny, ironic mass to this because it's so thin-skinned, but because there's no projections, it really feels massive sometimes. So you don't know if you're looking at a piece of granite or looking at a piece of tissue paper, shrink wrap, like a CD. We have a thing called the Fisherman's Act in Nova Scotia. You can cross anybody's property to go fishing, which messes up some of the Americans who come up because they're used to private property. But the Americans who come to Nova Scotia are cool. We have a long history of good relations because we have all aunties in the Boston States and everybody's connected. So, but the people who come to Nova Scotia are really cool. The Americans are actually the best people in the communities. They're the best visitors. They get it. Anyway, so this guy is an art historian. He's got a site with 12 dead boats on the site because of the 12 dead fishermen that didn't come back in the spring to pick up their boats. They left them. So he's got this art collection full of dead boats. Microclimate making. That white's here showing you how it works. Gives you extra time in the spring and the fall to play outside. Slippery tube to live in presents a certain kind of problem. Pretentious Vermeer shot. That's my Vermeer interior. So this is the south end of the building. The end of the building, that's this big solar thing. And you go there in the middle of the winter, the heat's off, doors and windows are open, kids are playing on the concrete. The warm concrete, because it's in-floor heat, hydraulic heat. And you go behind that fireplace bookcase to get upstairs. Trashy books are on the back. And this is the kind of shoulder into the wind. We always have wind. It's a serious problem. And it's a serious problem for wooden architecture because wood is terrible in tension connections, right? The grain, it pulls out of the grain. So wind shear is the big problem. Gravity is easy, wind is hard. So I guess seismic is worse, right? I have a daughter now that's a structural engineer, and her thing is wind and earthquakes, which is great. She used to work in my office when she was this big, and she'd say, I do my best work in my dad's office. Anyways, the wind. This is all about the wind, taking the wind loads into the ground. That's the only articulation in all of it. Gotta have a wide top on the railing so you can put your drinks. So you can see how boring we are. This building we did this year. And it's just a kind of first cousin. Remember I said my family had been married, their first cousins for 400 years. So this is a first cousin of that one that we just built. Now I think it was $300,000, so I was like, whoa, this is expensive. Same thing, porte cochere, framing the view of the ocean as you arrive. You really feel like you're on a boat when you're in this. So most of the time when you're in there, you can't see the land at all. So the county where our fire is, where most of these projects are, is made like leaving this landscape, that when it reaches the ocean, it becomes islands, it becomes cliffs. So we're still kind of in the village. Now, Glenn Burkett told me when I was pretty young, he said, if I was you, I'd start my practice the way I intend to finish it. His own dad told him that when he started. So that's my intention, and you'll see I'm working my way back to the little village, to the barnyard, and one day I'll fall off my rocking chair into the ocean there. But in the meantime, you'll see that we're getting a long ways from the village after a while and getting into larger buildings, which are harder to design maybe than simple ones. So here's the landscape. That's a genius loci for you. Hey, look at that, how powerful that is. And here it is in our village where our farm is. Every one of those drones has a long axis. The cows are lazy. They walk this way, the long way, and they go with ox carts to the ocean to get seaweed to plow into the soil every spring. Sea manure, we call it. So there are these rights of way. So once again, you know, if you're into private property, forget it. The guy who we designed this house for here is from Pittsburgh. Not the person we designed it for, the person who bought it from the person we designed it for. We designed it as a retirement house for a couple, lovely couple. They spent 8 nights in it and then sold it. I'd even designed the room where they were supposed to die in bed, looking at, you know, the whole thing. And then 8 nights sold it. Anyway, the people there now can't handle this right-of-way thing. And also can't handle living to the crazy next to the crazy architect. So last summer I just said, why don't you just leave? And the next day they had a sign up for sale. Because they were really hard to live with, because they just didn't get the idea that the landscape is a communal project. You should live in a subdivision somewhere. So this house is right in our village, and this is Kenneth Frampton's favorite house. So Andrew, John, you'll remember last summer at the Ghost Conference, we put the 3 tenors, the 3 elders in there, Glenn Murkett, Kenneth Frampton, and Johanni Plasma in there. And Kenneth describes this house as banal. And only a British guy can say that and make it sound like a compliment. Banal. No. Anyway, so Frampton loves this house. So he says that but when you achieve the banal, it's like the building was always there. So he describes this project as the counterform of the land being the roof. First sketch on the left, very fancy, more fashionable. What we built on the right, more related to that ridge road. That line is that ridge road, so it's all about following the cultural rules, letting the building siding and structure be cultural grid, letting the skin on the building be the climate thing. So Nova Scotia's on a big diagonal, south is never where the ocean is, so the building has to have corner windows and stuff to relate to climate. So rather than, you know, we have a lot of Newfoundland jokes in Canada. You know, how many Newfies does it take to change a light bulb? You know, 1 to hold the bulb, 4 to move to rotate the chair. Well, that's the bottom left. So if you want to, you know, do the light bulb, you just put a window in the corner and call it a day. Right? It's not that hard. So that's the actual project that comes out of that sketch. So you see, we go very directly to an answer. Now, one of the things about working in the hinterland is that there's not many distractions. You can actually get some work done. You know, a lot of my friends went to the Big Apple, you know, to the big cities. Had to be in Berlin, had to be in London, had to be in New York. You know, had to be at the cocktail parties, had to be at the openings, and really never did much. You know, end up working for the band somewhere. You know, not their own work, and distracted, I would say, distracted. So harder to be distracted in West Texas, harder to be distracted in Canada. So this is again that idea, that interest in the monolithic, the ironic mass of this building. You can put your fist through it because it's tissue paper thin, but scribed to the ground so that it seems really massive sometimes. It's built like that. That's the vernacular of current North American house building. Platform frame construction. You build a platform, you build the walls of the platform, tilt them up. And I love that idea of getting close to the vernacular. It's dangerous. I mean, this building is banal. It's not banal. It's so close to nothing that's a bit scary. It's a hyper-platform frame building. The floor is the same as the walls, so they threw the tape measures away when they did the foundation. Then they made the platform, made the walls conform to the floor, tilt them up, so they didn't need any tape measures to do it. You arrive on the north side, obviously the north side, and you have to climb the hill to see what's over there. So it's about this idea of procession, the idea of withholding the view. And then, of course, this is what nature does in 15 minutes. These two pictures taken, same camera, 15 minutes apart. So if you think about what climate does to buildings, you don't need to do so much, because nature's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So you get up in there and then you see the big view. Of course, hard to get this view. It's 70 feet long, 7 feet high, focusing on the islands. Built like a bungalow with a stud wall down the middle. Pinwheeling relationships with windows and doors, like the barns that I showed you earlier. So Kenneth likes this, and Russell made that. And I like to tell the story about the guy with grade 5 education who was a carpenter on this project, who got bailed out of jail lots of times. He's died and come back to life a few times. He does crystal meth and alcohol together, goes down on the floor in the tavern, they have to resuscitate him, comes back to the site. So anyway, he made this, and he said, "Did I get it right?" And I said, "Yeah, you did." I took it as a compliment, and he said, "The building was just an outhouse." So it matters to me, and I think it should matter to all of us in the kind of new world, that you know, what your mom thinks and what Kenneth Frampton thinks is actually equally important. You know, frankly, a lot of what we do as architects is pretty contentious in the community, right? People think we're nuts most of the time. And I think it matters to keep asking yourself, what would Mom think? Or what would Russell think? You know, I've seen Russell on the site at the end of the day on Friday, before he goes and buys his cocaine, you know, crying, having made a beautiful piece of something on a construction site, and saying, you know, I never thought that I would ever in my life do anything of quality. So it's neat when that happens, right? So another great thing about being our architects is you get to be the kind of social worker, you get to be a motivator of other people, and can actually make a difference. Now Gordon MacLean, who was the ghost builder, is the real Pied Piper. But it's great. I mean, life in architecture can be great because of all these layers, right? They don't tell you about school. Another building in the village, the Hill House, that Andrew talked about. Sketch on the beach. So when the west sun is shining on this, it's audacious. They call it the airport. And when in the village, and when the sun is from the east, it's just a silhouette of the hill. When you climb the hill, you want to get the view. When you get up there, it's cold and windy because of the airfoil effect, speeding up the air, so you need a cord. And I got this idea, I guess, from traveling in Scotland, in the Highlands, and finding these Neolithic ruins of hilltop farms. You know, this idea of what Glenn Murcutt talks about. He says architecture is a balancing act between prospect and refuge. So that's a big thing that we think about when we're making these buildings in the landscape. You get up there for prospect, but now you need some refuge, so you make a courtyard. First sketch with the owners in the tavern. And these people become our neighbors. I mean, we see this building every day from our house. Partie, and you're beginning to get the idea that these partie drawings, these essential plan drawings, are really important to us. Franklin Wright said two things. He said that I like. One was that thing about getting an idea the first day. He says, if you're not going to get an idea the first day with the client on the site, you're never going to get one. The other thing he said, he was prone to hyperbole, right? But he said, an architect is a master in plan or never. He said, if all the great buildings in the world were ruined, torn down, they would rebuild themselves on the promise of the plan. So I really believe that. And once again, the computer thing is making architecture more about imagery. Imagery is a big short circuit in the design process. Giancarlo DiCarlo said to me, he said, you know, once you give an image to a client, you can never ever take it back. It's over. It's like when you tell the client early on, it's schematic design, they say, how much do you think it'll cost? And I say, I can't tell you right now. They said, oh, come on, I won't hold you to it. And then, then they really remember, you know. So you got it. So the nice thing about abstraction, which is what the Parti does, is it allows you to continue to work out this project without the image and without taste coming in. You know, people say, how do you get, Nova Scotia must be a very liberal place, you know, people must be very game there. No, same as everywhere else. What I do is I don't let people focus on what it looks like too soon, because it's a kind of a dead end. So this abstraction is really good. And we're taught in school that unless you draw pictures for people, that people are stupid. The clients are stupid and builders are stupid. Wrong. They're really smart. And if you patronize them like that and show them pictures, say, here's my computer drawing, stand here, this is what it looks like. They're thinking, I'm being patronized here because I want to know what's over there, or I want to know if the whole thing actually hangs together. And you can't see that except in plan and maybe section. So the plan is your friend, and I'm worried about the computer thing. The magazines already participate in that pictorial way of thinking, which is hurting architecture a lot. You can be sure Luc Kahn and Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright, they knew what a plan was, they knew what a Parti was. You can go to schools of architecture now and use the word Parti and they don't know what you're talking about. They think it's time for a drink. So the hill is on 45 degrees to the north-south axis of all the hedgerows and things. So the cows are lazy. So the way you cut through the courtyard like that on the diagonal is about how the hill is different than the building. The natural landscape is different from the cultural. So this is a camera. This building is like a camera for a woman that's a landscape photographer. There's also a record house, I guess. Looking at our farm over there. So that wall you saw in the Parti that started as the entry porch comes around and out and becomes the kitchen, and then becomes a garden wall that makes the courtyard. And there are two of them, and they embrace one another this way. I like the plan of beds. I like seeing how much you can subtract from these forms, these tissue paper thin, massive shingle forms. The woven corners there, no corner boards, all that makes it look massive and solid. And that's a 1600s detail. That's a 400-year-old way of making it cool. You can see the twist here of the hill versus the building. If the building was more fashionably complex, you wouldn't see that. So we're moving farther from the village. Here we are in Montreal, outside of Montreal, where the valley, the St. Lawrence floodplain, meets the mountains. Lots of interesting buildings on site already. Precedent, again, the local precedent, the French-Canadian Habitat houses from the 1600s on the right, on the left, the wooden chapel. First sketch with the client, the first day, plinth, the massif, the bedrock coming up, versus these floating French-Canadian roofs. The model, again, highly abstract. We do computer modeling too, of course, all the time, but this is conceptual design stage showing the bedrock coming up. Parti drawing, 4 walls, be partly erased, making courtyards. Inside of a bounding box. not the Flintstones anymore, so I'm going to go fast because it's not like that anymore. So that's one that's under construction, or in design. Well, it's in construction. So back to the village. On the hill above that house that I showed you a moment ago, to the right, just on the edge of the screen over there, is going to be Marilyn's house, my wife's house. And she says, no pressure, but if this isn't the best project you've ever done, the best house you've ever done, I'm not building. So, make sure that's clear. The other thing that's clear is I don't have any money, so I got time to think about it. If you come up that long Drumlin Ridge Road, and you come under the belly of this light piece, the heavy piece is stone, turns out becomes the hearth. It's parallel to the house we just saw, and this one shoots out over the bay, and is parallel to all the ghost stuff that you're going to see in a minute. So we're working on it. I don't think it's right yet, but we're working on it. This is the kind of airplane sketch thing, grid paper, or sketchbook in this case, using colors to talk about systems within systems. So you enter underneath the belly of this thing, you come up a 1,000-foot alley and up under the belly into a courtyard between the edge of the woods. And it's the only flat place in the county that you come to. And then you end up looking back from that flat courtyard out to sea at this view here. It all closes down. It'll all be screens, sliding screens, so it'll all be completely mute. And that stone piece is a swimming pool for fitness. There's a skylight up in the courtyard, puts blue light into the courtyard, and then you swim toward the ocean horizon. So that has this belly again. You know those fish heads up off the ground. So this one has a real belly. We call it two hulls, and it's like two fishing boats that are up on chocks, we call them, for the winter. You put them up on the land over the winter, and you can kind of crawl around underneath them. So the two hulls have 35-foot cantilevers out over the ocean, because when the waves come in here, they'll take the foundations out from under the building. This is big Atlantic waves. You can get 35-foot waves here. It would take the building right away, so the cheap thing to do is to do this heroic cantilever if you want to keep the building there. So it's a steel frame with a wooden skin on it. It's a sleeping pavilion and a living pavilion, a day and a night, and it's really a tribute to Glenn Murcutt's Marie Short House, which has two pavilions that slide by. One is day, one is night. His kind of go past one another this way. These are both going out. I took Glenn here this summer under construction, and he's a taskmaster. So this faces, so he said, where's south, Brian? And I said, that way. He didn't say another word. He didn't speak to me for 24 hours. But when you got a view like that, you got to kind of go with it. So this is, again, very plain on the roadside. Two library blank walls that become libraries, just walls of books. You enter into the link piece. The link piece is tricky. The link piece doesn't make it to the night pavilion. It shoots through the day pavilion out to the other side, gives you a view down the coast. So impersonal on the public side. You can pass through that foyer, or you can go up the staircase, which is also a kind of drawer, dresser drawer thing. You can go up into the night pavilion to sleep. And everything in that cross piece is Ford cedar, indoors and outdoors, pre-weathered, all that, so that it'll always look the same inside and out. You go into the white spaces of the two tubes. We always make the furniture, as I said before. So here's the kind of dining, living thing, and then looking down the beach to the west. Back toward the 40-foot long hearth. Kitchen. Those bookcases I talked about. Sleeping pavilion. The owner owners asked me one time, can we have a loft in the master bedroom? And I said, why? They said, well, we're scared to sleep there because it's so tall. It's a 24-foot tall bedroom. And I said, no. You're going to have to get a canopy bed. Great clients. We get them on this intellectual journey with us and leave their taste at the side. These people had good taste anyway, but a lot of people don't, right? So, including myself, actually, taste's a great bird. So these guys are clients who would spend the last dime they ever had to make the concept pure because they feel it's their concept, that they were part of the making of it. So here's the Godzilla shot. There's always a Godzilla shot. The photographers hate it because they don't like distortion in pictures. And of course I love it because it's that perspective of being under the boat, you know, under the kind of forced perspective of being as a kid underneath the boats. First sketch on the site the first day with the client from down the beach. And that's the building now. And this will be a record house this year, April issue of Architectural Record. That's the kitchen. You see the little window that's tall, looking down the beach so they can have breakfast and watch the kids play on the beach, hopefully not drowning. And then again, as I said, we're boring, so we're working on this house in the village at the same time as we're doing that. This one's under construction. And this is a cantilever off a stump. And the stump will be covered in that nice 2-inch cedar, really, really thin. And the building kind of cantilevers off that stump from the top of the hill. So when you arrive in the village, you just see a tiny little thing. So when you arrive in the village, you're here. And that building is at the top of this field here. So it's directly above that one, which I'm going to show you now. So they're very different because time gives you a sense of humor. I mean, they're designed a couple of years apart, so they're different. They're different concepts. You know, one's on the ground, the other's floating, but the two roof lines line up. One is wood, one is metal, and that, I think, makes for an interesting village. You know, if you have time intervening between things. So we've got like 35 buildings now in this village, and we're working on about another 5 right now. This is our old house we built 30 years ago, which is a 1750 Cape Cod house. That's that barnyard. There's the chicken house. We just restored this barn for the 3rd time this past year. There's the ghost site over there where we really live now. So this house looks like it's going to slide down the hill and land on my children. It's called the Sliding House. And it's all about working with the choreography of coming into this village, and coming in and out of these spaces that are in red. And understanding, remember that early sketch I showed of the space between the buildings that were, well, that's the same thing. It's the same courtyard. That sketch was drawn 30 years ago, right here. That sketch I drew, that was one of the first slides, was a drawing of that space 30 years ago. It's called the Sliding House. It looks like it's sliding down the hill. Corrugated metal looks really good when you use it horizontally. Makes nice corners, make these butterfly corners. But you can't get the water off the roof because you want the corrugations to run that way and over the top and down. And of course there's no slope. So what I did is design the building for a flat site and put it on the side of a hill. So it's the hill versus the ocean horizon. Remember I talked about the ocean horizon. And it's also about not building on the land, building on the stone wall. It's a passive solar house like all the other ones. Be careful of this whole greenwashing trend that's everywhere now. You know, when we had our conference in Nova Scotia last summer, there were 200 people there, and it was an historic event, and there'll be the Princeton Architectural Press book about it. Well, there were 10,000 people the next week at the Greenville Conference in Toronto. Mostly carpetbaggers, mostly charlatans, on a bandwagon, thinking that you can reduce architecture to some kind of lead program, some very, very narrow agenda about architecture. Architecture is broad and interesting, not narrow like that. So, of course all these buildings are passive solar buildings, because that's what you do to be practical. It's what you do. That's good manners, you know, it's just about being it's basic. It's not the whole point of it. So you got to be careful about this LEED certification and all that stuff. The best thing you can do is build well, that'll last forever, no, it'll end up in the dumpster. That's green. Next best thing you can do is be urban. That's very green. You know, use passive solar techniques. That's very green. Make buildings that don't leak and rot. That's very green. So this is an all-metal building. Those are the kind of process sketches that try to get to it. And I think it's important in school for you to see that it's not sort of easy or obvious. You know, people see a simple project, a sort of minimalist project, and they think, oh, well, that you just kind of went with that. You just kind of went directly to that. Well, you don't. You know, I feel like I've been working on this project for 34 years now. Like that's what's really going on. There's only one project. So when a client says, you haven't got what I've got into this project, if you're an architect, you say, well, actually we do. Because we've been working on this project. We've been putting blood, sweat, and tears into this. And our family have been paying for it. My kids have been paying for it for over 30 years. You're putting a couple $100,000, that's nothing. We got a lot more invested. You know, a client in this village said to me, I'm the one who's paying. I said, look, you know, this is a village that I've been working in for 30 years. You know, like, we got a lot invested in the architecture too, as architects. So this is the kind of watermelon project where there's one big incision that cuts into the watermelon, and the flesh of the watermelon is all hardwood. So every square inch outside is metal, every square inch inside is hardwood. And there was a kind of a little exercise to try to see if you could make all the fenestration of the building with one exacto cut, one line. And I think about the drawings that Matisse did when he was in his late 80s, where he tried to do a figure. He would do these wonderful figure drawings with the idea that the discipline was you didn't lift the pencil off the paper. You made one line, and it had to carry all the weight, all the energy, all the content in a way of that figure in one line. So again, it's a search for kind of zeros. So there's the ocean horizon story. You're like in a dugout canoe. You jump out into the core to go up and down, so you're the mouse in the wall, you know, like at the cottage. The mice running around in the wall cabinet, you've all heard that at night. You become the mouse. So transition into public things. Went to the Dogon to see in the footsteps of Aldo van Eyck and all these poor people before. Trying to understand the kind of anthropological beginnings of architecture. So what's the kind of beginning house? What's the minimum house? This is a Dogon house, very simple. So a bunch of us went there 3 years ago. Rick Joy from Arizona, Tom Cundy from Seattle, Marlon Blackwell from Arkansas, Wanda Burnett from Phoenix, myself and my wife, Peter Rich from South Africa. We went for a month in the Sahara to study this stuff. We may do a book about it. Yohani Palazzo wants to make a book together about it. So where does public architecture start? It's a similar kind of question. So these people have been living there for 2 million years, right? Like this is one of the oldest places on the planet where humans have lived. So they've thought about a few things. And this is their kind of primary public architecture. It's called a Taguna. And it's brilliant from a point of view of community design, urban design. It's beautiful from a point of view of environmental design. This is a cool space, the only cool place. It's 45 degrees centigrade every day there. Makes me think I'm thirsty. And it's the coolest place in town. You can't fight because you can't stand up. These are smart. This is smart. These guys are smart. trying to understand from the landscape, starting in the landscape, the savanna, the sub-Saharan, Sahel, to the sort of barn, that's putting hay in the tree branches, to the taguna on the cliff edge, to the market, to the mosque. You put a wall around it, you've got a mosque. So we started doing kind of urban architecture, public architecture in town. So this is where we live in the city. It's another kind of village, a working class village, just to the north of the Citadel in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Bought an old gas station, made an office there, built 4 townhouses, tried to pay for it. That's a theme, you'll see that 3 times tonight. So this blue rhombus is all about what you can do with a light timber frame building. You can whack holes in it because there's structural plasticity to light timber frame. We're reshingling that building right now. The old office was in the gas station. Then we needed a bigger office because we were going to do some public architecture. Try to step out of the village, step out of the domestic scale. So that our office is the second from the right there, next to the lesbian bar, which is just to the right of the gay bar, just to the right of the needle exchange, which is just to the right of the legal aid clinic, which is just to the right of the Aboriginal Friendship Society. So this is right in the hood, which is great, because these are the best people. They come, they say hi to you every morning when you're on your way to work. They're not people that are friends when they think you can do something. So anyway, we wanted the building to really be part of that. So we made a box. We say this building isn't in Halifax. We made this 2-story box floating above a porte cochere, just like the houses. Takes you into a courtyard. And that box could be anywhere. It's off the street. And we work inside that 2-story room on a big 40-foot table, which is another theme. You'll see a lot of 40-foot tables. So it makes a courtyard facing back toward these townhouses that we made. So active will again, urbanism, to say this is a neighborhood that's decayed and we want to put energy back. We want to drive people out of the neighborhood. We want to not white paint big houses, but add new units, add owner occupied and rental, add commercial and residential. Have everybody have a door at or near grade. So my background is actually in urban design, you might not know it. First public building we did was the School of Architecture where I teach, where those professors that I pissed off so bad were now my colleagues. And when I did this project, they tried to have my license revoked to practice architecture. Tried to make a didactic instrument about construction, about trades coming and going from the site. So this is different now. Public architecture is about different kinds of issues. The materials are different. This issue of trades and systems or infrastructure approach is really a thing about making large buildings. You need to think about buildings like trades that come and go from the site. And they all have different tolerances, different tools in their toolbox. And so I wanted the architecture students to understand that their first day of school. I like to say these guys, Daryl and his other brother Daryl, designed it. They got to decide how we were going to do this because of what they could do cheaply. They were going to take my license away. These guys wrote letters and they said, "You're crazy. We've never worked on a building with no extras before." The building didn't build itself. So they didn't take my license away. It was a bit of a witch hunt. The real problem was our work was getting published too much and the local architects were getting jealous. Sad, but true. We get along great with our peers, and that's why I'm here, with you guys. The collegial thing that we have in the discipline is really, really valuable. It's a great source of inspiration and psychoanalysis for one another. It's like AA, right? Architects Anonymous. So that condition at home even has changed. Your anger, you need anger. You need to be angry enough to have a career. But anger doesn't take you past 40. So I was angry at I got kicked in the ribs a lot on the way through. And now, of course, I'm not as angry, and partly because people stopped kicking. People did stop kicking me after a while. But the peers in the world, the rest of the world, the community, never did that. It's always been a very positive thing. Okay, did a computer science building, they call this the cheese grater in Halifax. Again, like those fish shacks, floating on a fish tank glass. It's a big electronic loft space. We did a campus plan 10 years earlier. Charles Moore, Carlo. We made this thing 200 feet long without a single bit of relief in it, like taut skin tissue paper. This is a vernacular building. It's in the vernacular of office buildings now. So it's $130 a foot. Again, all the systems are expressed. It was very cheap because every trade is expressed here. No trade bashes in any other trade. And the other thing about public architecture that I think is the most important thing is the idea of social agency. That public life is about gathering, and our public buildings are really mostly, first and foremost, about social agency, sort of empowering people and making people places. So this is an act of will. There was no atrium in this program. There are 1,000 people in this atrium every day, going up and down the stairs, seeing and being seen. Another project that it's called the Shiny Copper Penny. It's up at the University of Toronto. It's a library. It's not so shiny anymore because the guys coming home from the tavern are peeing on it. The nice thing about doing buildings that don't really meet the ground very much is there's less places for them to pee on. First sketch, to get the job in the interview. So you got to do that fast. If I hadn't made this sketch, Libeskind would have done that. And that's the sketch you do with the users about the contiguous public space. So you see the same yellow there as you saw in the house plan. The social places in this are linked together in a similar way to the way the social spaces in the house are linked together. You know, everybody said that. You know, Albert said, you know, a house is like a city. Everybody said that. Aldo and I said it. So this is participatory design, to do this with the community. Charles Moore said before he died to me, his only architectural truth he'd ever discovered was that participation always works. He's a modest guy. 20%, 15% under budget, so we had all this money for this beautiful cherry wood. This is a systems diagram. It's not a thing. It's not about the thingness. It's not about the pictorial aspect of it. It's about sorting through the layers of building systems. Columns, walls, wood, miscellaneous metals, windows and doors, lanterns. So it's really not at all about what it looks like. Sure, it has to look like something. So then we did an art school in Halifax, renovated a big chunk of this warehouse. Football length field of it is the red part we did. Act of will, social agency, make a gallery that wasn't in the program. Renovated a 300-foot long building for $10 million, which we thought was pretty swell until the boat pulled up. Showed us how dinky our thing is. You approach it like the houses, you go in behind this thing. It's a chameleon like a lot of the houses are. So it changes from day to night. The town side is the black box, the ocean side is the 300-foot long window with all 65% of the money went to the pipes and ducts and so on that make it a kind of clean place for artists to work. That's Canada's Ellis Island. That too is where everybody came to Canada on ships, historically. So we're starting to do these public buildings. This is in Prince Edward Island. The design ethic here is that you make a university building, you add one pavilion, you make two quads. So you have to domesticate the campus when you make a building. Now we've made another building since then on the other end of that diagonal. We just finished. I don't have any pictures of it. So there's one quad. It's kind of a big public room for meeting. This is where the university researchers are supposed to meet the the industry people who are going to commercialize their stuff that they invent. You can see again the wood is used as a kind of sweetener to express the public domain here as it folds around things. It's all breakout. The whole building is breakout. It's 100% gross up. There's no part of the building that isn't public gathering. So that's an active will again. There's the other quad. Another public building on the Niagara Escarpment. It goes down that way to Niagara Falls. At Brock University, of course, made out of Niagara Escarpment stone and copper because it's a 400-year skin. Parti sketch in sectionless time. That south elevation. Social agency again, the idea of gathering. This becomes the important place on the campus. It wasn't in the program, there was no budget for it. Went to the Board of Governors. We didn't have any money for the stairs, we didn't have any money for the copper, we didn't have any money for the stone. So I'm working with another architect firm in Toronto, and they start talking to the Board of Governors saying, we're so sorry, we're so sorry, we're so sorry. Client passes me a piece of paper, says less is more. In other words, tell your buddy to shut up. So I said, you gotta have the glass because, you gotta have these stairs because this is the social agency thing. You gotta have the stone because this links you to your place in the world. You gotta have the copper because the last 400 years, they said, okay, wrote us a check right there. So you gotta remember that too. You know, to serve is not to be a servant. A good client respects you for being strong on what you believe. I remember a mechanical engineer one time saying, you can do this, you can do this. I said, for Christ's sake, don't you believe in anything yourself? Like, what do you believe in? That's what you should be telling us, and that's what we'll go and build. You know? So it's an act of will. So we have to respect ourselves enough for our clients to respect us back. Right? So there's that social space. Where's the next building supposed to go? That takes us to Bangladesh. There's a professor here from Bangladesh. Is still here? Oh! Okay. So our big hero, Louis Kahn, did wonderful building in Bangladesh. You've all seen the movie My Architect. So we found this, at first, very different from home. You know, you got a different climate, you got different material culture. You got bricks, no shingles. You got bricklayers. You got Ganges, Delta, silt, and bricklayers. So, but then the more we looked at the place, the more I thought, yeah, you know, the more you travel, the more you realize everybody's like back home. You know, nice people, good folk art, friendly, lovely people. And I need to do all this public work, a partner. So, expanded the office, took a partner. A partner was a student of mine, a former student of mine, named Talbot Sweetapple. And he calls this the UNICEF shot. And he thinks, you know, was that Austin Powers movie? There's that guy, Fat Bastard. He says, it looks like I'm going to eat all these little kids. So he doesn't like me using this slide at all. There's Dhaka, there's Newfoundland, the east coast of Newfoundland where Talbot comes from, up top. So again, just like home, right? A little different on the weather side. Monsoon time. So we built this building on a street corner, elevated plinth. U.S. Embassy to the right, fashioned after the Red Fort in India. Whoops. India, wrong country, wrong religion, wrong metaphor. Like public, you know, embassy, fortress. Crocodiles, razor wire, moats, all of that. And then we got the Vatican over here. This is the Pope on this side, in the shrouded trees and stuff. So they're very nervous about this building because they think, because we're right out on the street. Again, active will. We said Canada's not like that. We're different. And we're going to put this thing right on the street. And then the Minister of External Affairs said, can't do that. I said, too late. Already built it. So we forced it onto the street. And now, of course, the U.S. and the Vatican think everybody's going to climb on our building and jump down on it at night. So this is a brick. This whole building is a brick because it's in a brick material culture. So the red is all brick. And another active wheel, I guess, is that since 9/11, we know that embassies are not public architecture anymore. They're secure building types. They're office building types. They're not public buildings, really. And so we said, we understand the security issues, we respect that, we're going to deal with that. But at the same time, we want to aspire to making public architecture. So the little yellow bits are the Canadian maple bits that are around this courtyard. The courtyard is an Islamic form about outward modesty. It's a tropical form, one room deep courtyard building. So it's a local thing, made out of bricks, which they know how to do. Client said you can't make it out of bricks because that's not spiffy enough for a Canadian embassy. I said if you don't make it 80% out of what they know how to do, you won't be able to afford to do it. And they reluctantly went with that. So I went back 8 years later when it was finished, and the guy was there at the door to meet me, and he said, you know, you're right about the bricks. And I said, no, I actually wasn't. I said 80%, it should have been 100%. Then it would have been a better building, would have been cheaper, would have been built better value, it lasted longer. And that night I went to give a lecture at the Architects Association of Bangladesh, and I felt so stupid. I went into this all brick courtyard building with beautiful ventilation, you know, natural ventilation, and I thought, geez, am I stupid? So we're trying to do another embassy now, try to get it right, atone for our sins. So that's the brick, good enough. Indirect entrance, like the houses, toward the consular entrance, which is the south facing Brise. It's a brick. It was all brick, it would have been better. Immigration entrance on the street from Dhaka, protected, so for the people waiting in long lines in the monsoon rains. And in Dhaka they call this the round embassy. And I think they get that it comes from their culture too. Like you can never know, you can never be sensitive enough, right? You can never be, like when a Bangladeshi person puts their heel into the Ganges Delta soils, they know what's going to come out. We'll never know that the way they know it. That we can try to be as respectful as possible, you know. So an embassy is really, you know, an embassy is about the guest country and the host country, and it's about mutual respect. It's not about fortresses and stuff. It's about mutual respect. And in a way, that's, I think, this has tested our critical regionalist philosophy because, in a way, that's what all architecture is, really. You're a guest. You come to a place, a site, the property of somebody, and you're a guest. And you have to be a good guest, right? And you're the host. And it's about finding a dialogue. And so this project is really just like a house, I guess. So down at the ghost site, this is turn of the century. I got frustrated teaching in the 90s. Because I know that I went into architecture because it was going to be about the environment, like landscape. It's going to be about making stuff. And it was going to be about community, social agency, all that stuff. And I was going to quit architecture school even after those guys tried to kick me out. I wouldn't have left because they were trying to kick me out. I would have left because I was disappointed that what I was being taught wasn't about what I went into it for. So I know that you all go into architecture for that. Your intuition is right. Young people, good intuition. You get in a bad school, and I know this is a good school, but in a way I think when I went through school it wasn't a good school, and you know, I just wasn't learning that stuff. So when I was a professor there, and this was in the paper architecture time when everything was being mystified and none of the professors knew how to build anything or cared about it. You know, so I got pissed off and took my students out to the farm. So we went back to this landscape that I had been clearing for 20 years that used to be a historic settlement. This is where Champlain made his first landing in the New World in 1604. And when he got there, that house was there. And he talked about it. He said, yeah, it's probably been there 150 years already. So Before Columbus, people were living here. So it's a cool place, a very magical place. So I told my students, close your eyes and imagine flying over the bones of a lost village at the end of the earth. Come with me and we'll go and do something. So we went and made a master plan on a pie plate, which is based on the idea of the kind of protective thing. This is Port Royal, this is Champlain's first European settlement in North America, north of Florida. My ancestors helped build that. And we made this. We made it in a week. That's my partner, Talbot Sweetapple. The first time we did a ghost, he was one of the students. He's the larger silhouette there. So we were going to pack it up and go home, and then 100 people came, 200 people came over the hill, and then the cows came. There were 100 beef cows, and people brought 4 bottles of beer, and we partied all night. And we thought, and they brought instruments, fiddles and accordions and stuff. And so we thought, well, this is sustainable. This is culturally sustainable. So let's do this every year. And let's do a week of design and a week of building, and palpate the site, learn about the site by making these temporary structures on it. And then have a community thing at the end. So the year we made this one, it was a wake for a village matriarch, the village matriarch who had died in Beulah. And this is a wind tube. I wanted the students to see the wind moving through structure. When I see shingles, I see the freeze thaw, wet dry, I see them moving. When I see a building like this, I see it like an infrared photo. I see the wind acting on it, and I see the loads moving through it and heating up bits of it. So this is a wind tube, all about seeing the wind. That's what the wind did. Actually, the posts, or fence posts, they rotted off the ground. I call that the Frank Gehry shot. I really have no interest in designing things that look like this. Nature does this way better, right? It's like, what's the point of that? That's not what biomimicry means. Glenn Murcutt's buildings use biomimicry. They don't look like snakes. They don't look like soap bubbles. They work like nature. Don't look like nature. So anyway, we started building these things, getting some more fancy guests in. The fancy guests, well, these are the Noah's Ark here, the fancy guests coming in. We brought guest architects, guest historians, guest builders in. And we do this thing in a week, and we then build it in a week. So design it in a week, build it in a week. We make a sketch like this the first day in the barn, and then we go and build it. Then more people came, better musicians. Sketch first day, work in drawings, project. This particular time it was Rick Joy was the guest architect, Kenneth Frampton the guest historian. We have a guy in the village who's the world's strongest man. His name is Greg, and he broke the 150-year record that Leo Sear made of lifting more than any human has ever lifted in history of the world. Right? Leo Sear was an Acadian guy. Anyway, so Greg breaks his record by 3/4 of a ton. She said, Brian, I thought I'd put her out of reach. So anyway, he said, I lifted my first ton when I was 15. So this guy was there, leaning up against that first column, talking to Kenneth Frampton. This thin British intellectual guy, and there's this guy, this big guy. It was so cool. I said, Kenneth, meet the world's strongest man. World's best architectural historian, please meet the world's strongest man. So the community came every year. We got up to like 1,000. We have different music acts, recording artists. Got to be like Woodstock. So here's another building that doesn't really meet the ground. Recycle the bits. So we put we start the bagpipes at dusk with the fog coming in, and then light these things up like Burning Man. Ghost is like the ghost ship myth. Every maritime culture has a burning ship on the horizon myth at night. So we'd light her up, start the bagpipes, and it got to be 1,000 people would come over the hill to the bagpipes. We'd always start with the sketch like this. See, this is what I mean. Like, here's a sketch made with other people. You don't do that alone. If you do a sketch, if I did that sketch by myself, it would be nicer looking maybe, but it wouldn't be as good a sketch. So the messy kind of process sense of that sketch means it's a social thing. And so is building a social thing. It's great. We do this mostly to get young architects, engineers, builders, students of architecture to have some humility about building and to respect the builders, because really, I mean, a bunch of people with PhDs look pretty stupid out there. With the guy with the grade 5 or the farmer who says, you know, one time we had all these engineers and architects arguing about getting these two towers level together, and they had a 200-foot long string level. It's really stupid. I mean, that's an oxymoron. A 200-foot long string level. They did like that. And they were going on, and the farmer comes over the hill. No, the builder comes over the hill. He says, Brian, come up here. He's on the side of the hill. He says, what do you see? I said, well, they're trying to get it level. He said, well, no, what do you see? Right behind the string level, from where he was standing, was the ocean horizon. He said, that's the best level there is. It looked, I could look down, it's like the Tower of Babel. All these guys were down there fighting, you know, about it. And there, well, another time we were trying to make it go straight. It was a box and it was crooked. Gordon, the builder, says, you know what, it doesn't look plumb to me. I said, oh, it looks okay. He said, no, it's not plumb. Get your plumb, you get your level. So I put a level on the side of the building. Sure, I said, oh, crooked. And I said, not that bad. I said, no, it's not good. So you could see all the young bucks, all the ghosties there, all fit, you know. We're going to push this building straight, right? Push, you know, like Plato pushing the rock up the hill. So, and Gordon's laughing. He's 65 years old. He's laughing at these guys. You know, the youth, the audacity of youth. They'd still be there trying to push this thing. It'd all have hernias, and there would be no way you could push the thing straight. So he took the smallest girl on the site and he said, grab the whippiest, the longest, whippiest piece of green lumber you could find, a 1x3. And she did. He said, nail one end up on the parapet inside, the other one on the floor, nail it down. I pulled the generator so everybody could see and hear. And I said, watch this. So he gets this girl, the smallest girl on the site, she gets one finger. I think it was this one. One finger. He said, you just pull on that stick. So she takes one hand, one finger, pulls on the stick, straightens the whole thing out. He said, okay, Brian, nail that diagonal on there. So, you know, you feel so stupid. And that's why we do it. That's, you know, because architects need humility. Because first time I ever went to the job site, I was 23 years old, builder's there waiting for me. Well, Mr. Architect, what do you think you're going to do about this? And I said, I don't know. What would you do? And he lit up. He was my friend then. He was there to bushwhack me, right? And so I had a friend that, oh, this works, you know, this is good. So that's what I always do now, is ask the builder. You know, so architects have a bad reputation in the building industry, being these assholes that come to the site, try to tell the builders how to pound sand, how to do the job. And that's the last way. And they think they're doing that so they don't get sued. Well, that's a sure way to get sued. Because they'll get you. If you act like that, if you're an asshole, they will get you. So anyway, morning after, we needed some permanent infrastructure, started building some cottages. First sketch, again with the gang. We built it from that. In a week, liability shop. There's the gal from Maryland trying to take the head off of the gal from Scotland. With a wet, heavy, wet piece of hemlock. No helmet, nothing, right? That's one of the reasons I think we've got to stop ghosts, because it's dangerous. It's actually kind of dangerous. So we built these cottages. My wife went away for the week, and I said, what are you going to do this year? I said, we're going to just build a shed. She said, oh, okay. So, and then we're going to tear it down. So she comes that weekend, and she sees these 4 houses all framed up. And she says, it's not a shed. So, I said, yeah, it's 4 cottages. And we were pot committed, right? We had this there, you know. So we couldn't tear it down, so we had to take out the big mortgage, make them into real buildings, and now we rent them by the week. The rest of the year, and lose money doing it. So we made a studio, so we made that sketch, and we made this building, There's the partie, plan partie. There's the plan itself. That's what we had in a week. Poured the concrete on a Saturday morning with David Miller from Miller Hall. The next Saturday night we had 1,000 people. We live in there now, my wife and I, and we have a 40-foot long table in there now. So same thing, build another studio, 4 more houses. It's the third one, right, that you've seen tonight. So this is another passive solar building. And because it wasn't built as a house, it makes a great house. So there's often 50 people there for dinner. Over the holidays, we had Christmas holidays this year, we probably had 30 people in there, 40 people in there every night having dinner. Just people show up, pull up a chair. And it doesn't bother me, that idea of having your life out there, like out in public. I don't know, most people wouldn't like that kind of being exposed. So that's where we live. And when I fall off my chair there, like Glenn Merkin says I need to do, it'll be here. I remember when I worked for Charles Moore, we go up to Sea Ranch, and he had this window hanging out over the cliffs, and he said, if I'm lucky, one day a big wave will take me. It didn't happen that way for him, unfortunately. Can't plan these things. Ted Flamer from Texas was the guest architect on this one. Oh, geez, we went right past the, I think I went right past the movie thing. Gee, what happened to the movie? Maybe it's coming. So we restored an old historic barn, made a community space, built that in a week, pulled it 200 miles and then reconstructed it. Here it is now, my sheet. So you can see there's this kind of active will of cultivating its place. So here's the one of them going up. All the good weather. Like Gulliver's Travels, right? There's a little blip there. I think they slept in that morning. And there was a Texas Tech representative at that. I thought it was Amanda. Maybe I'm the wrong year. Nice weather. You can see it early in the morning, only a few people. All right. This is the boathouse. Texas Tech person there too. So we're zooming out from there. We're building 2 houses on this little point right now. So for students of architecture, Well, yesterday I was talking with practitioners. One of them 85 years old here, Frank Welch. So in a way, there's no big difference. I mean, students of architecture is a lifetime thing, right? So the real project is the design of that life. So you can see the active will here is to kind of utopian thing is to try to make the life one wholesome picture, see the world as one whole. So you can see you can see the teaching and the practice for me is one thing. You can see the family and the community is one thing. It's all one project. Now that's a kind of fiction, you know, I mean you have to kind of make that for yourself and you'll have to do that too. And in doing that you kind of hopefully respect your elders. So here's Albert Oxner with his oxen. It's like the Middle Ages, right? Mr. Cooper making barrels, Mr. Oxner with his oxen. Taking the seaman oar off the beach below, the ghost said. Wrote, couldn't read or write. Guy on the right, Charles Moore, could read and write pretty well, wrote 14 books. He's the dean of Yale and a whole bunch of other schools of architecture, director at UT Austin. And so he's an elder too in the village. So we got two villages, the highbrow one and the lowbrow one, it's all together. Like I said at the beginning. Charles is pretty smart, not as smart as Albert. And so there's my kids and dog. My wife is actually taking the picture. And I don't know who the guy is with the hair there. So it's important for me to see this all linking up like that. This summer we had the Ghost 13, which is either the end of Ghost period or it's a time to take a break and think about how to reinvent it. And Andrew and John will try to help me today think about that. So this is the kind of speakers at the conference, and it's Princeton Press called this the G20 of architecture, right? You got a good bunch of architects from all over the world in the bar. So the conference was called Ideas in Things. The world, the intellectual world, and the physical world are one place. Again, this idea of unity of the world. And here are the three tenors, I call them. Here are the three keynotes. You had Glenn Burkett, Kenneth Franklin, and Johanni Pallasmaa together. And then, 15 of the other best architects on the planet, some of the best historians on the planet. You're never going to get a group of people together like that again. One of the historians said the last time was when Team 10 got together in the 1950s. That's the last time you had a group that good, all together in one place, the generations, the whole deal. And I don't think it's going to happen again, because if I had to do it again, it would kill me. So I wanted to end with where we started here. I would like to say that as a practitioner, I like to think of my role as like a farmer, at cultivating rather than consuming the landscape. And you can see here there's this will to want to improve the land by building, not use it up. And everywhere you go, you see it being used up. And I don't think, you have to be more optimistic. So I like to think of myself like a farmer, like Albert there, leaving the world a little better than he found it. And as a professor, I like to think of myself like a village priest. And the role of the village priest, really, other than the ones you read about in the paper. Not those guys who like little children. As a keeper of the faith, someone who keeps the lamp lit, and I would say in the face of often disappointing reality. That's the hard bit. There's a story written, a short story written by a French writer in the 1700s, I think, called The Prisoner. And he's talking about being in the Bastille. And in those days, you got in jail and you were there for life. One big stone cell, one window, young guys in there. Old guy gets to be up in the window, sleeping. So every morning, it's the old guy's job to tell everybody what's going on out in the world, right? Because he's got the window. So they say, what's happening today? And he say, you know, the sun is shining, the sheep are in the fields, and everything is as it should be. And everybody takes heart from that, and they go about their day. So the young guy, eventually, he gets to be the old guy, because he's there his whole life. So he's now gets to sleep in the window place. And so, first morning, he wakes up, very excited, looks out the window, stone wall. That's the world, right? So what does he say? People say, how is it today? You know, and he said, well, the sun is shining, the sheep are in the fields, and everything is as it should be. So in a way, that's our role. And it's an important role. And often it means going against what's happening. You know, just because stuff's happening doesn't mean it's good. Right? So I would say architects need a healthy dose of both empathy and anger. Enough empathy or love for the real world as we find it to want to improve it. And Johannes Kalasma puts it this way. He says, building implies and evokes optimism. We are able to build only to the degree that we have confidence in the future. However, empathy is not enough. We must possess enough anger and conviction to want to change the world too. So first we have to love it and accept it, and then we got to try and change it. Two utopian traditions, right? One is you like go out in the desert and make a new Jerusalem. Turn your back on the world. That's what Arcasanti is. You know. The other one is to say, no, the world, you know, it's okay. Let's work with it. So I think that's the architectural response. So, anger is not enough. Empathy and anger, need them both. So architecture is a combination of empathy and anger, or listening and willing. So that's it. So thanks for coming by.
We have a few minutes for some questions. If anybody has any questions. But about anything, actually.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It was fantastic. Earlier before you mentioned the connection to the open city, which triggers from your description of the wind tube, this idea that there's people standing there making tests and not being afraid to push them to failure. And I'd be curious to hear you talk about that in both in your practice or also in the ghost work about being able.
Well, certainly in the lab, we think of the ghost lab as the one-to-one model shop,
Right.
as a research lab for our practice. So, and there you can afford to have things fail, right? You can, but for clients you can't. Now, if you're really good at that, being able to convince them to come with you on an intellectual journey, then they're more forgiving if things fail, because they feel part of it too, right? But yeah, I think in practice you've got this liability issue.
Yeah, I guess for me it's I guess the question of finding a balance with that, where it's not a destination, failure not as the destination, but as a productive tool along the way.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we started doing the ghosts, is so that we could play more freely like that and have stuff that didn't work.
But fantastically so.
Yeah, so you know, you make something and you think it's going to be a good cantilever, and then the builder goes like this, go home, it moons, and they say, oh, we better do something. You know, so in a way, practice is like that too. It's still possible to practice a little bit like that where I live. You know, the builders don't expect you to have an exhaustive set of drawings. They want it to be a process.
I have a question kind of off of that. Is there another?
No, you're good.
Which has to do with builders' knowledge and material information and just that relationship that you can have with people that actually construct and materialize your ideas. Because I think, well, you talked about architecture as coming down to this zero and trying to reach a zero. And it seems as though the people that you work with to realize architecture are essential in that, creating a type of banality. But it also seems like in our industry, as the trajectory of the industry right now, that we don't have as much knowledge base in the building or in the natural building. I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit about how you dealt with these different projects where you constantly interact with people with different building knowledge.
Well, I can say what I learned about construction in school was nothing. You know, like when I grew up speaking French in an immersion situation in school. I learned nothing about speaking French. We had to study in school. You know, in architecture, I learned nothing about construction. I learned everything from the contractors. You know, so that's it. I mean, I learned everything from those guys. You always feel so stupid, you know. And if you allow yourself to look stupid, then they'll teach you stuff. You know, it's great. So, I mean, it's great for young people to hear that. I think that it's a lot of fun, and you learn stuff all the time. The idea that you open yourself up to other people, you don't just try to force your vision through all the time, have just what's between your own ears as the agenda, because the agenda that you get from other people. Now, we do the same thing with class, these participatory design things. I mean, you learn so much in a hurry, right? If you're doing a library and you got the librarians and the students and everybody there, wow. I mean, you just can hardly hang up. There's so much information you get so fast. And same thing on the site with the builders. So I love that. I love that oral learning, that kind of conversational way. So I don't know, you know. And I don't worry about getting sued. We've never been sued. So, is that real? So I just love it. You know, I love the process, that interaction. It's great. That's why you want to be an architect. You know, it's cool. It's like, what's cooler than that? You know, it's interactive. It's a social art. You know, it's the ultimate social art. Bit priest, bit shrink, bit, you know, great social worker.
It takes a bit of the burden off by saying, you know what, I don't know everything.
Mm-hmm. And I had a learning disability, so I couldn't learn from reading. I couldn't write until I was 30, I think, at all. You can only dodge the English classes so much in school. And so I learned to compensate by being a question asker. So I would sit at my grandfather's feet when he was carving stuff in his rocking chair at 85. I'd ask him all kinds of stuff. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And people that I learned at a young age that my handicap was a great advantage because they thought I was doing it because I was really nice. And actually it's the only way I could learn, you know, because I couldn't read it. If you gave me a barbecue, like out of a box to put together, I couldn't do it. I draw plans. I had to put stuff together. I couldn't read a set of instructions. So I had to learn by asking questions all the time. And it turned out to be great. It's turned out to be a good handicap. And now I write books and stuff, but it took a long time. I learned to write because a person who'd written a lot of books and won a lot of prizes for writing books said to me, you know, we're driving around in a truck, you're storytelling. If you think of writing like telling stories and having a conversation, it'll be good writing. It'll be a little different, but it'll be good writing. So that's how I write too. I write like I'm talking to somebody. We're having a conversation. Yes?
You talked about the first sketch as a very important part of your design process.
Yeah.
The first sketch is something that you do with your client very early on. Could you talk about the difference of that first sketch when you work with an individual client for houses and smaller projects versus institutions?
I think it's the same. You got to listen more with the institutional thing. You saw me making that sketch on the blackboard with chalk. That you could only make that sketch at the end of a whole day of listening to people explain their ideas. And what we're really good at, I think what architects are good at is, besides like spatial relations and stuff, pattern recognition. Abstract reasoning, spatial relations, pattern recognition. Now children are very good at it. And so our job is really to, I think, is to see what Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, calls the pattern that connects. The synthetic pattern, the pattern that makes sense out of a whole lot of things all at once. So that pattern recognition thing is, I think, what you do. You listen, you hear, you watch, Glenn Murcutt talks about, he has 78 things. Remember he said? 78 things he does when he goes to the site. 78. Most of us got 2 or 3 things, Where's the wind? Where's the sun? 78 things. And so that pattern recognition, he's taught himself to manage a whole lot, right, of stuff. And it's a cultivated intuition. I would call that, because children have it. That's a good start. But then I think as architects, we have to cultivate that intuition so that we can be professionally skilled at it. So I think when you're dealing with public buildings, it's exactly the same. And there's always a eureka moment. And you get up and you say, is this what you mean? You don't say, do this. You say, is this what you mean? Because you're curious. You really want to know. Is this what you mean? You don't mean, I can fool you. You do this. No, you say, is that what you're saying? And you write a sketch. And then everybody says, that's it. And then everybody's happy, go for a beer. Right? So it's just like the house thing. You have the beer after. The house thing, you need the beer during, I think. It's exactly the same. So this partie thing, it's from the French verb partir, which means point of departure. Partir means to leave. So point of departure. So it's a point of departure, and if you have a partie, everybody knows what to do. Everybody in the office knows what to do. Builders know what to do.
You also pointed out that you don't do it on the site.
Sometimes I do it on the site. I was in Ontario last week doing a couple of things with clients, first day things, and it was snow on the ground. So I had a stick and I drew on the snow. And I needed my yellow highlighter, so I peed. No. I was tempted, but there were kids there, so I didn't do it. But little kids, little tiny kids, not good. But you do, whatever, And you don't think about it. Those sketches I showed with all those extra lines, those are, you're not thinking. One thing I learned, I had a very good teacher one time who said, to be good at drawing, you never look at the drawing. It's not the drawing. You look at the thing, or you think about the thing, or the person you're talking to, and the mark making that comes out of that is way better than the mark making that comes from thinking about it as a drawing. So you get an idea, and you get all excited, and you get a stick, and you're on the beach, and you scratch something in the sand, or you do something like that. And I know it sounds very corny, that's very corny sounding, right? Like the artiste or something. But you do it together, and if the client doesn't like it, you rub it out with your foot in the sand, and you do it again. And it's a search, and you're with somebody else doing it. And the thing that comes out is more beautiful than anything you could have done intentionally. You could never do those drawings after. People try to do it for publication. Like that sketch of the guy, me and the 2 clients on the rock, that I made with them on that rock. Well, I've tried to make that sketch again. I can't do it. You can't do it. Can't be done. Sure as hell not on the computer. You just forget that. But even by hand. It has to be this immediacy. So once again, what a cool thing to be an architect and to live in the present light to that extent. Just get that excited with someone else. It's like we're lucky. This vocation is so good. But, yes.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
On a note, you mentioned a lot about drawing and talking with the construction workers and stuff. I noticed that you didn't bring about much of the technology base. I know our generation is more with like technology and making sure that it, but you're more into the drawing and aspect of that. I mean, how do you go about that?
We're making sure it's technically sound?
Yeah, I mean, besides it being technically sound, but do you feel that, on a certain level, architecture should remain as far as, drawing plans and having that communication with those construction workers and just being there on site compared to being in front of the computer,
Well, you got to draw the drawings. You got to make the drawings.
Yeah.
And so you do have to go back in your office and do it. And, use the computer. I mean, we work on the computer all day long. I mean, that's really what happened. That's the truth of it. And so you got to make those drawings. I mean, I built most of these early projects, those houses that people know, I made them with sketches. And now with the computer, everybody's we used to make, record house with 12 sheets of hand-drawn. Boy, when you're drawing it by hand, you don't draw any lines you don't need to draw. And now we do 75 sheets to make some of the houses. And you hit the button, and it repeats, and you got the same detail on 10 sheets, and it's a waste. And then the prices go up because the builder says, geez, they measure the thickness of the set, right? So I think you do have to be careful. The computer gets you, you lose the cost, the sense of the effort cost of making a drawing. So it cheapens. Like, example, ghost, photograph it after. Every year, people come, young people got the digital cameras. We get sometimes as many as 5,000 photos in 2 weeks, right? To work with. And if we get 3 good photos, really good photos, because it's so cheap to push that button. And then we get the guy with the hood and the large format 4x5 camera, and he takes one roll, 6 shots, 4 good photos, 4 out of 6, not 3 out of 5,000. So that's an honest, actual statistic. So this ease with which we can use the computer, one form or another, call it a digital camera or whatever, to cheapen the exercise. Like if it takes you time to make a line, you want it to be a good line. So you take the time to plan it out and think it out. So I think the computer's great, but you have to know how to draw by hand first. The people who draw the best on the computer are the ones that draw like angels by hand. Invariably, they're the people. You know what a line means? So the computer's very important. But anyway, and so technology is very important. Now, I wasn't trying to downplay it, but the story of how to build this stuff, again, I don't need to draw very much because where we work, we try to work within the vernacular. In other words, build in details that people already know, right? So you don't have to draw very much. Like Glenn Murkett, you look at his working drawings, not many lines. People say to me too, your buildings are so well detailed. And I laugh, right? I think it's crap. Like Glenn says, the culture makes 80%, and he does a semi-tailored garment, and you draw 20% that isn't given by culture, right? Like in the vernacular. So you tap into that, it's good. Building science is very important, and that would be a longer talk. But it's super important. I don't want to downplay it. I care a lot about it. Once again, learned it from the builders. Didn't learn it at school. Hard to learn at school. Teaching technology in school is the hardest thing. And there's a lot of things you can learn better in school. Like I don't think design build. It's a great way to learn to build, and I don't think it's a great way to learn to design things. It's one of the reasons we're stopping goes, frankly. Because when you're face to face with the materials, you don't have the professional distance to think laterally, abstractly. If you're doing a renovation, you'd never want to stand in the house and do it because you can't see past the walls that are there. You draw a plan, you go away, you fly over it like a bird, now you can think straight. So I think there's a real problem. A lot of the stuff that happens in design build is not very good design. A lot of the design build firms aren't good architects. Steve Boudin said to me a couple years ago, Jersey Devils, 35 years, living in an Airstream trailer, building. and designing after midnight, after the contractor phone stops ringing. Well, he said, you know, I think I wasted some time there. He said, when you've laid out the conduit once real nice in the electrical room, you've done that. Just like hard work in the fountainhead. You know, he's in the quarry there and chipping out stone and everything. Good to do it once. But if you're an architect, you've got to be good at other things. And the one thing that pisses the builders off the most is the architect goes to the site and tries to tell them how to do their job. They say, no, you're the architect. Tell us something we don't know. Right? So design build is a little tricky, I think. It's like it's like that greenwashing. You know, it sounds good. You know, LEED, you know, great. You know, let's all go to the Greenville thing and buy low flush toilets. And, you know, design build's a little bit too easy too, like that. Confusing the two things. An architect is a conductor, not playing the instrument. You know, conductor has to know, orchestra has to know every instrument, and he's the only person in the orchestra that knows. And every person in the orchestra plays their instrument better. So I always tell my students, you have to be satisfied being the dumb one in every conversation. Talking to the planner, they know more. Talk to the banker, they know more about the financing. You talk to the carpenter, they know more about a piece of wood. You'll never know what they know. But our job is very important. So instead of feeling bad about that, we can rejoice in the idea that we have this role of orchestrating all these other people's skills. And we're one of the only disciplines that are trained to do that. Like, that's why architects go into software, go into film industry, you know, furniture, you know, everything, right? Because we have this kind of, and architects' brains, my wife's a neurophysiologist, you know, brain researcher. And you know, architects have all kinds more lateral synapses. You know, engineers go straight. You know, architects are looking like that. And so that means you're not going to be the person who knows everything about anything. So.
Yeah, I have a very simple question. Is it easier to design with a beautiful, evocative landscape, or with a site that is more, as we say, banal, but in that sense banal, in a negative sense? Or do you think the site anyway doesn't really matter, beautiful or not? It has those conditions that you have to deal with, and somehow you can always find inspiration on the site.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
You know, people see these nice landscapes that we build.
And so you say, oh, wow, easy to design that, but
Yeah,
actually,
it's not. And actually, we call it, like when I show you a site, the sliding house, that horizon view, you know, we're designing a house. Same with the Messenger house, the one overlooking the ghost site. Those clients went through that design process with no view. No view. Trees like that. No view. I actuated trees in my life, and I went out and I cut them all down. And I cultivated the land and everything. And when they came back, they had a big view. The view wasn't there. I made the view. And you cultivate it, you make it. And the buildings are really about enhancing the sense of the landscape, making it better than it really is. You know, if you do this to the islands, they seem like big islands, but they're little islands. It's not New Zealand, you know, it's not. It's just dinky little islands. So it's an act of will, I think, to make it. And I think the real test is what you do when the landscape is not giving you any clues at all. That's the real test. I think you're alluding to that.
One of the issues that came up constantly through Ghost 13 was the issue that the proportions, the nesting, the composition, these are all gifts. These are all free. And Deborah Burke, for example, would be a great example of that. How she talked, and I wish I could remember how poetically she put it, but she talked about her job was to arrange all the ordinary things.
Mm-hmm. And make it something extraordinary out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's, you have to bring something. That's why DeCarlo was right, you know, to serve is not to be a servant. It's not a parasitic thing. Architecture is not a passive or parasitic thing. You have to bring something to the table. And the clients want you to, by the way. You know, the clients want you to bring something. You're hired to pay good money, you know. So, yeah, what you bring in, yeah, I don't think it matters. I think you can build anywhere. And having an observational skill to see potential of things that other people don't see.
Yeah, that's why our students here, sometimes when we have studio and we are looking for sites that are outside of Lubbock, and I always say, well, if we work in Lubbock, it's just apparently that we don't have anything to look at and to observe and to register and to bring it out into the project. Just think about 90% of sky. Just that idea.
There's something there, you just
There
don't
is
notice.
something there, right?
And the other thing we
it's
bring
not
is
the
understanding
place.
of history. History is a powerful tool. You should study your history carefully because, you know, a good friend said one time to me, you know, every good architect, when they make a good building, have a model in their mind. So you go to a parking lot in the city, Tabula Rasa, but you come with a model, like a courtyard housing development, or a row housing in London, or something that you've seen, and you bring it to this situation. So this idea, again, that you just have to invent stuff all the time, not true, right? Because you have to know your history, and you bring, you know, you're doing the landscape, but you have to know who Walter de Maria, you have to know who Giselle, you have to know the history, otherwise you're a child, right? So I think that when you don't have a site that's giving you much, then you need to know your history and to bring your toolkit, you know. So it's great. I mean, what suggests is a discipline where every day is a new day. So you need all the good methods and best practices you can have because the actual world is way more complex than any of that. So there's some really good tools in your toolbox. Just make it possible to do something because conditions change all the time. You know, they're never the same. So that's another good thing, right? About being an architect, just every day is a new day. Wicked. You can figure out how to make a list of that'd be happy.
Well, thank you all for coming. Give Brian a